Good day and welcome back to another episode of the Truck Focus podcast. I won't lie, I'm super excited for today's episode. Almost to the point where I feel like a little kid. I just really respect the gentleman I'm going to introduce and just his story. And yeah, it's super powerful. So in today's episode, we have Sean Raible. So Sean is a global total rewards and HR leader who's worked in most industries throughout his 20 years in the field. His clients range from small startups to large multinational organizations that are looking to implement total rewards, HR operations, or mental health solutions that reflect the proper balance in considering market conditions, employee preferences, and overall the costs and risks associated. So Sean is passionate about impacting mental health in the workplace with practical tools and solutions using what he's learned through his own mental health journey, combined with seeing the positive results in supporting struggling employees. So from conferences to podcasts just like this, which is great, Sean is committed to bringing light to those that are struggling in the dark, one life, one community, and one organization at a time. So he actively volunteers with Variety, so the children's charity, and has previously held a board position for 7 years with the McLaren Housing Society of BC. Sean also holds his mental health first aid and recently completed Workplace Wellness CEO's Executive Wellness Leadership Program. Sean, welcome.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here, Josh.
This is exciting. And just for everyone listening, why I'm super excited about today's conversation is I really like when I can meet like-minded professionals that are really honest with their own journey and kind of supporting others through their journey because they've been there. And after a couple conversations with Sean and I got like really buzzed. So I'm excited for today. So thanks, Sean.
Me too.
It's awesome, man.
That's great.
So I guess to kind of start us off, aside from, I know I gave a really good introduction of who you are. Can you kind of explain who is Sean and how did you get into, I'll summarize it as in the human resources industry?
Yeah, sure. No problem. Yeah. So thanks. So I started HR over 20 years ago, and started working at a large retailer, and it kind of just grew my career. But I mean, the thing about as I learned, as I went from kind of organization and working in different companies, is you really can't lose sight of the people, right? The employees that are working there and everything we do and how it impacts them from an organization standpoint, and learning about how do you ensure that people can bring their full selves to the workplace, to really stay curious and not make assumptions about others. And so part of my journey is, as I kind of went through HR and supporting, employees, I also have my own journey. And about 14 years ago, and I talk about this a fair bit on wherever I can, is I went through depression and suicidal thoughts about 14 years ago. And it was a manager that noticed a shift in energy, just something was off that day. And opened a conversation to getting support I needed through counseling and support. And over those few months started to kind of regaining control back of what was happening personally. But I didn't talk about it for over a decade. Like, it just, the stigma around it, impact your career, etc. And it was, I went to a Tony Robbins event, 2017. And it was in LA, and 9,000 people, and started talking to this random stranger. I was a realtor from Vegas, lots of realtors at a Tony Robbins event, and talked about this moment, right, where a manager had kind of noticed, and the dark part of that I was feeling in those dark days, and how that supported me. And the fact that I was hiding that, why was I ashamed of my own story? And went back to the workplace after this Tony Robbins, and I learned so much in those 3 days, unleashed the power within, rah. There's it's quite an experience, right?
Yes.
For those that know. But I really got to honor my own story and appreciate and find gratitude in going through that. And then how could I actually take that energy and kind of knowledge and my own experience to mental health, wellness, disability programs in the workplace? And so I started, sharing my story, just going hyper curious into the space, and like, how do we find where there's gaps and opportunities in the workplace where we're not adjudicating claims properly for mental health related cases? Do people feel safe? Or do they trust the EAP or employee assistance programs? Those, and a lot of times people feel like they don't trust them maybe sometimes, and there's low utilization. People aren't calling them all the time. So really started to kind of break things down and say, you know what, like this isn't right. And so that's been the last 4 or 5 years, has just been on this journey of how do we shape mental health in the workplace where it becomes that you can bring your whole self, that you can thrive, that leaders and managers understand their impact as well, that we don't have to all be counselors or psychologists, but we know how to be kind, human to
Yes.
human. And how do we reduce burnout? How do we increase resiliency? How do we create a place where stigma starts to get eroded away? And so that's kind of been my journey. And only in the last year and a half did I start on my own. I actually was in corporate roles for several organizations for those 20 years, and only the last year and a half on my own. And that's kind of the game plan for rewards that we do and the areas that you talked about. And just excited to be able to, talk to organizations around mental health, share my story, but also practical tips and tools and stuff like that. So that's kind of my story. So it's just a kind of, HR guy, but I've lived experience and and really just wanting to stay grounded in the reality of it. And with the pandemic, which is interesting, I started my business right before the pandemic. Um, was with the mental health pillar, it was like all of a sudden the pandemic hit, and then it started like just the calls, and people were like, wait, we need to talk about this stuff.
Yes.
And organizations that maybe thought it was a side program now are going, we need to go deeper into this, we need to start, yeah, or never talked about it. I've one engineering company I was working with, this is the first conversation they ever had, this but a couple months ago ever.
Yeah.
So pretty exciting stuff to see that. And there's a long way to go. We've always had mental health issues in the workplace, and well, work-life integration is all the same, right? It seems like
Yes.
but it's exciting to see more organizations picking up the phone and saying, what do we need to do? So
Totally. That's
yeah,
incredible. And I think there's real power in using your story and to shine light, because
yeah.
I think a lot of our world is, I'll use my story to say, woo is me, and the world sucks. Let's bring people down. But you've done the complete opposite, which is, man, it
Well,
gets,
it's the
it's
power of the story, right? It lives in your heart forever, right? And there's a lot of power in that. We did at one organization where we had different leaders talk about mental health, whether it was their own story or how they support their employees, and we put that into the learning program so that new employees or new managers would watch these videos. I had an employee call me. He's like, I saw you on one of our new hire, videos that were talking about mental health and your story. And thank you for, I didn't know this person, but they reached out. And that's what's really important, is that we don't just do a one-time thing. We actually build these trainings and support systems and share stories through video and put them into our training program, bring them to our onboarding. How do we,
yes,
it's okay here, right? You can bring your
yes,
full self to work. And here's how these people may have navigated that, or here are the resources that are available, and go beyond just, so that's really cool, is to create sustainability around these things. And so a lot of organizations do a good job implementing something, or hey, we did the training, check the box, but how do you actually integrate it so it's just part of how you bring people in and coach people and support leaders through the journey of their
right.
life cycle with that organization? And so that's really important. And I think that's something I like to stress with my clients is, don't just do the one and done. Like, how do we actually integrate this with everything you do? So
Yes. Yeah. It's nice that you mentioned orientation, because I've been spending a lot of time on that word just in a different part of my life.
okay,
And
yeah,
you're building you're building habits that that's one thing that I really like about the training environment and orientation. So again, in trucking, that's kind of my space,
yeah,
is the trucking company is allowing someone to understand out the gate what their expectations are, but also the vulnerabilities. And I think mental health, a lot of times people don't want to talk about it.
yeah,
Maybe it's an archaic way of thinking where you have to be the tough guy, or you have to be this, you have
yeah.
to be that. And it's like, no, no, let's talk about it. So why I mentioned the orientation part, why that stood out to me, is because that's something that when we're helping people build
Yeah,
orientation packages, and again, in this space, it's like
yeah,
clearly state that you're an open community, that you're really accepting to, how are you doing? Just
yep,
asking the question and leading with empathy, instead
yep,
of like, I'm trying to, again, coach people away from cracking a whip, and more so trying to understand, okay, why and
yeah,
how. So, but yeah, that's really powerful. That's
yeah.
exciting. And
Thank you.
I,
Yeah, you say the word empathy, and I only go to Brene Brown's. She's got a great video, empathy versus sympathy. That it's like 2.5 minutes or whatever. I play it all the time as much as I can, different training. It's a great, if you haven't seen Brene Brown, YouTube it, Brene Brown, Empathy versus Sympathy. I've had people come after me, say, I'm going to send this, share this with my kid. Like, it is such a great depiction and done in a really great way that really lands and resonates. So if you want to learn more about empathy versus sympathy, what that means, and you're looking for some quick material that you can learn from and share, check that one out. Definitely. I'm not paid by Brene Brown to do that. This is not a big plug or anything, but just, if you know much about Brene Brown and kind of vulnerability and get in the arena and just about there's strength in that, understanding what does true empathy look like and how does that sound? And when you can just be there with somebody and hold space with somebody, and say, thank you for sharing with me. It's just, you don't have to have all the answers. And that's what a lot of us are fearful of, what to say or not say. And sometimes it's just being present. I'm just here.
Totally. Yeah.
I may not have all the right words. Do you have somebody that you can talk to? You don't have to tell me everything, especially in the workplace, right? Sometimes, like, I'm not going to tell my manager that, but do you have somebody, right? And so sometimes people will never even talk about it. You'll never know, and it's okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of high functioning folks with anxiety, but by creating a baseline that we do talk about this, these are all the types of resources we have, so that people can deal with stuff when it's a trickle versus a waterfall. So it's that,
Yes.
I love that kind of analogy of dealing with stuff. How do you be more proactive to prevent, bigger issues, and trying to do and provide different types of, support programs and tools, from, mindfulness to, resiliency training to et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's key, especially in today's workforce too, where it's a little more diverse, obviously, with different genders irrelevant, but ranks, and then culture, and are you a newer Canadian, are you born and raised, like, just all of those vulnerabilities. I think, that's really important. And from a leader standpoint too, understanding you don't have to have the answers, but just being willing to listen is super helpful.
And how are you taking care of your own mental health too, right, as
Totally.
leaders? So if you're stressed, if you're feeling that can show up, and then people see it, right? And so you think about the psychological standards in Canada. There's 13 factors of a psychological safe workplace, and you can really get into culture and leadership, and there's lots of material online. But really, at the end of the day, if you think about how leader sets the tone and walks the walk and talks the talk and all that, it's an open door you really want to go through, that they themselves are taking care of. It's huge. And we all have moments. Like, that's the thing, is even if I've been in this space and I do what I do, I'm still learning. I still talk to somebody once in a while. It's just like physical fitness, mental fitness, right? And so, and finding those aha moments, going, oh, if I just change the narrative of that anxiety, I just had one the other couple weeks ago where it was like stressed about something, and my coach was like, well, what is it saying? And I'm like, where are you feeling? I'm like, in my hands, I was kind of shaking a bit. And I said, well, it's saying, don't make a mistake. Don't make a mistake. And she goes, well, what do you want it to say? I said, well, I want it to shut up. But she goes, no, what do you want it to say? I want it to say, well, just breathe, just breathe, just breathe. And just changing the narrative of that, the shaking stopped. I felt calmer. I was breathing. Just the word choice. So how, this is what's so cool about, and the neuroscience of this stuff, is like how the brain and everything's connected. And it's just, it's a beautiful thing when you have those moments. You're like, oh, you know what? If I just change the narrative, I just get quiet and think about what's really going on and what am I telling myself, that's huge, right? Because a lot of our fears and anxieties are about things that actually haven't happened yet, right?
Yes.
So we don't even know if it's true necessarily. It could be, but so just getting quiet and just understanding, what story am I telling myself, and where's it coming from, and what's the worst that could happen? Like, just getting quiet. And that's why, but yeah, like, continuing to do that. And as leaders, we need to continue to invest in our own mental fitness and health, because then you really can shift your culture and teams. So,
power, man.
Yeah.
This is awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that. And it's nice because it's, most people listening are, I would say, in the space of interest and eagerness to learn, because that's kind of the stage we've set. And a lot of what you've shared so far is really applicable. And I just, like I said, using the story and that's a really power statement. So I appreciate that.
No problem.
So kind of as you navigated 20 years of field in a year and a half, which is super exciting. Congratulations too on having your own business, and it's rocking. What, from a personal journey, what do you think's been the biggest highlight so far?
Oh, man. The biggest highlight, I think it's the ability to take a moment that was really dark, and to find my purpose. And yeah, and just having, like, I've had a woman call me after a mental health workshop and said, I finally talked to my mother about some of the things that were going on for many years. And after the talk that I had, she went and had that conversation and created a new relationship with her mom after that. And that'll stick with me. So those moments like that, I worked for a heavy industrial company and spent a lot of time, there was a lot of stigma, and I had a gentleman write me a letter saying that he didn't know that we had some of the sports we did, and he used the services we had and to deal with something with his family, with his wife. So I remember those moments. So those are the highlights. It's really this last, I've had some cool stuff I've done and been blessed to, but what really gets me excited and just feeling very grateful and blessed every morning is those moments where somebody's created a shift, right? To change one life, which is kind of the mental health program and that's amazing. So yeah, when you feel you find your calling, I think that's kind of the most important. And then just getting into staying in gratitude of that. But yeah, no, life is short. And no one's perfect. We are not robots. So I'm still on my learning journey. So just trying to stay humble and find those moments where, like, oh, I didn't show up the best today, or I need to put myself in the corner and like have a timeout. Like, like we got to check ourselves sometimes, right? So, but yeah, those would be I'm kind of getting more on a personal level, but
Awesome.
I mean, yeah, if that works.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And it really aligns with the term pivotal in my company. Was I went through that myself, well, all the time, but I can still recall when I first moved to Alberta, and my best buddy's dad and I had a pretty open conversation, and that was a real pivotal moment for me, where I could actually trust someone and just kind of disclose the baggage, and then through that deciding, okay, my life is changing now, and being that for people and knowing that's like your sweet spot and that's you're living in your zone of excellence is really cool. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And those that have been receptive to it is really cool. So
well, I was watching this video the other day. It was talking about wisdom versus wounds, right? And if I had to quote the name, I'm sorry, but it was, as things happen and you get wounded and you're a victim of something terrible, and this, how do you turn that into wisdom and learning and I think all of us have those moments, right, where we feel wounded. And it's how do you move forward? And I think, like, the time for me when something happens, it's a shorter window now that I can get to the wisdom of what did I learn from that, right? So I don't stay in the wounded state as long as but we're human, so it's okay to I think it's okay to not be okay. And that's kind of some of the messages you hear. But yeah, I just watched the other day, it was like wounded versus wisdom. I kind of like the word choice. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. So, and everybody has their spin on this stuff, right? So it's not like you can read different books and stuff to talk about for many years. And there's just so many resources and people talk. It's great. You find what works for you. But there are certain things and certain principles that are so true that you'll see every professional or speaker talk about these things. And I think that's pretty cool. And that's what's important with anybody's mental health and their journey is don't stop, right? One thing may work for you, one thing may not work for you, just depending where you are in your life and what's going on. So keeping this, I kind of call it the beginner's mindset. So it's because if you're an expert mindset, then you know everything. So as a beginner mindset, then possibilities are endless, right? And so I think that's something I share in the context of a mental health journey is have that beginner's mindset, stay curious, stay open-minded. Don't think you're the expert or that, or somebody maybe gave you some advice and then you're like, well, that's what they said, but maybe that didn't work for you. And there's so many stories of people that have, challenged something and said, well, maybe there's something else we can try. And it's worked, right? To get off maybe medication and trying different types of alternative therapies. And it's like, opening our minds to that. So
totally. Yeah. So in the
I think I went off trail a little bit.
No, man, this is good. This is really good. This is painting a really good picture that I think, well, my kind of where I was hoping to go with the next question and some of what you said was mental health challenges are there's many, I'm sure, and they're so specific to the person.
Yeah.
So what would, again, I know it's a broad question, But
It's
what
okay.
would some mental health challenges look like that people could maybe identify in themselves? Like, okay, I have been feeling like that, or I never would have thought of that being. Is that something you're comfortable answering?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. I think the way I would answer it is, everybody has a baseline, right? And so of how you operate and how you kind of, your sleeping patterns or and all those kinds of things. When things start to impact your life in multiple areas, love, finances, work, whatever that is, kind of multiple areas of your life are starting, and over a period of time, like at least, a couple weeks, like you're seeing, those are flags, right? So that kind of continual impact, right, in a negative, so off your baseline, right, and everybody's baseline is different. Mental health is very complex, right? There are some very serious mental illnesses, like there are, right? So we have to be really careful that not to, yeah, these kind of one size fits all and everybody. So, but everybody has a baseline, and so that's really important, is to understand, and then have that peer group or those that you trust, right? Close family, friends, partner, whoever that is, that you can that will see you, right, and hear you, and will also be able to say, I think you might be off your base. Say, I've noticed something's shifted. So making sure you've got a good support network is really important, because they'll know your baseline, so they may be able to put a flag before you even realize it or want to address it. So that's important, is kind of that mindset. I think for when it's just really when it starts to impact parts of your life, and when you lose sleep, that's a huge thing. So just fatigue,
Hmm.
constantly feeling that, and or you're not, you used to go to the gym all the time and now you stop going, or how your nutrition, all those kinds of things. And I think, some of the best practices are about, mindfulness and getting quiet and just starting to, find those moments in the morning just to kind of, create that time for you, right? And it's hard if you have kids or you have a busy life or whatever. It's hard to find that time to get quiet, and just, it's so important, to just to find those few minutes where you can just set yourself, right?
Breathe.
Breathe and kind of, and then just kind of listen to that inner voice, right? Like there's something in our gut, and there are actually neurons in our gut. So I mean, it's all connected. When you say like, feel in my gut, well, it's connected, right?
Yes.
There are neurons. So that's how I would talk about it. It's really to understand your baseline, and then have that support network that people you trust, and then talking about stuff. It's really, it's super important. That's how I would address it. Yeah, there was a psychologist who was an HR leader as well, and she talked about, I think we have average like 70,000 unique thoughts a day. And I was like, wow, 70. She's like, because some people 90,000. I think I know people that are like 90,000. I think maybe some 50,000, but a lot of it's subconscious, right? And so only a small percentage are conscious. But why it matters to get quiet is you can start to think about, what am I processing? What am I thinking about? And trying to turn them more positive thoughts, or, action oriented, and to solve maybe some things that are going on. So I think people underestimate the brain is so powerful. We don't totally
Yes.
know all of it, right? But the sense that there's just constant these micro things happening all the time, and decisions and fears and this anxiety and limiting beliefs of like, and so just really getting grounded into, why am I doing what I'm doing? What's holding me back? How is this serving me? um and it's scary, some of this stuff, like, you just don't want to face it. It's better just to stay in the same lane.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get that signal on and turn lanes, you got to, and it's tough, but will you feel better after? And so, and it depends on every situation. Some things are going to be a longer drive, almost
Yes.
kind of fitting for the
The
truck
podcast. Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah.
So, but then you might turn off a little bit later. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
So, oh, there's my exit. So I was supposed to take that one, but I gotta take this one, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, you can think of it in that way. Is just, what exit should you might take on some stuff. And there was this one woman I talked to. She's a project manager. She's got her husband bipolar, got two kids, and so for her, with particularly the pandemic, she was describing it like a Bosu ball. And that was a great analogy, because it's not really like the Bosu ball, but it's hard to balance, right? So you're holding stuff. And the two principles that's really key is, are you taking care of yourself, your core, so you can balance? And then what are you holding up, right? So that Bosu ball of life, right? And so I love analogies, because sometimes it just resonates for somebody. You're like, yeah, my Bosu ball is
Totally.
deflated. I'm falling over. I'm holding everything. But for her, it was like, how do I be a good wife and a good mother, a good, manager for work, and, good daughter, all these things she's trying to balance and still find time for her. And it's,
Right.
it's a constant, rebalancing, and figuring out new routines and what has to happen, especially given her home life, right? And balancing, kids being at home now with, homeschooling, and her husband is bipolar, so there's certain terms of like or how things are organized and structured for the day, and yeah, there's just so many stresses. But yeah, she dropped the Bosu ball analogy. I'm like, that is brilliant. I love it. So
Yes. Yeah. You mentioned a lot of key things there too, where the pandemic. So a friend of mine was going through some stuff and we were talking about identity.
yeah,
And I think a lot of people right now still, well, maybe as things open up a little bit will change, but their identity was kind of ripped from them because basically there was a big stop sign in your face from the pandemic. You can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that.
yeah,
And yeah, I think just going through my own journey too, our world is really impacted. And obviously, you're mutual friends with my wife, which was really neat. So when you were talking about the last example, like of the woman, I don't have bipolar, but it sounded really similar to like Kathy. I'm being vulnerable right now, so you're welcome. But it really sounds familiar to what she's gone through too, because for people that know, like Avery, our 11-year-old, is really involved in the podcast, but we also have another little guy, and Kathy is an extremely hard worker, really cares about what she does. So I watch her sometimes in amazement when I can tell she's going through stuff and her processing is plants. Absolutely, that's her piece.
yeah,
And I have to self-check at times, being like, okay, don't be needy right now. Let her be her, because we're kind of limited still on. You can like we like going for walks, perfect. But how many walks do you go through or go for before you're kind of like, I don't really want to go for a walk anymore. So, but for her, yeah. So anyone that's kind of in that space, I really support what Sean said, where you have to be really mindful of that, and then having time for yourself is really important. Where me, it is actually the podcast. This is where, because of the connection, I like learning, and I like. So when you're talking about expert beginner mentality, sorry, I'm kind of all over the place because you said some really good stuff.
It's okay.
It's really key, because I think when you go into a new conversation for the first time, and if I were to talk to people like, I know, like it's so disengaging. But when you're like, even if you thought you knew it, but it's a different perspective and you're willing to hear it, and you're like, whoa. So that's for me, this space is really for that.
And I think that's the key, is that you create those kind of guidelines or rules of engagement within a household. How much do we talk about the news, and like I want to once a week's good for me, and some people are daily. So it's creating those rules of engagement, understanding each other, asking those questions, to make sure that your needs are being met and that you understand each other at that level. That's really important. I think another example, she was a mom, and she's out in New York. We were on a panel for workplace wellness, and I love that she was like, I got kids, I don't have time for this mindfulness journaling crap. So I'm like, well, what do you do? And she, I loved it. She goes, well, we have this jar with popsicle sticks that we write things that we want to do together as a family or we're grateful for. And there's an empty jar beside it. And we take one out, we put it in the other jar, and we focus on that. And so she's involved her kids in it, and it's simple. Because she's like, she was used to journal, but then kids came around and stuff. And I love that, because I think it is about, for your home and what you're doing, what makes sense.
Yes.
Keep it simple, involve the family, because the days and the weeks just fly by, right? And so getting creative and thinking outside the box. It doesn't have to be must do mindfulness, must do that, like do what's right for you. But there are people that, and that's why I'm just sharing examples of that, because I think it is good that there are different ways of finding those moments of joy and gratitude and connection and understanding each other, right? And that's whether it's in the home life or in the workplace. The more we can kind of get vulnerable, get real, get creative, get curious, less assumptions, super important. Because if we both come at a situation where we're both stressed, then it just amplifies, right? And so how do we just kind of like understand and kind of look at the situation together versus at each other?
Yes.
And that's really, and the other big thing in whether it's home or work, is the word choices. So I will share, I'm just going to throw this in there because I think it's a powerful word and I share all the time, is the word consider. So a lot of times we tell others what they should do or must do. So we should all over the place. So you should have this, you should have done that, should have done that. When really, if you just use the word consider, just replace should with could or consider, have you considered, or would you consider, or can we consider, versus we should have done or must have. The other person that hears that, they'll actually listen differently, because you can consider anything. You just don't have to agree or disagree. Powerful, right? So when you think about, and it was an executive from years ago, he, a large retailer, and he brought in a speaker who came from a massive company. He was like, and then there was a lot of things we learned in that, hour and a half kind of session, but the one thing was this word of consider. And he wanted to make sure that his whole team knew about the power of the word consider. It's like, and it literally just changes the whole frame of the conversation, because we can get defensive, right? Immediately. What do you mean I should have done something, right? Most of us will. It's an immediate human reaction. If somebody say you should do something, well, you want to defend your position or what you did. Versus consider, oh yeah, I can consider. Okay, let's talk more about that. I'll listen better, and that changes the relationship, which reduces stress, which is better for everybody's mental health. So I just wanted to share those kind of things. Like, words matter, and sometimes we make mistakes and we say the wrong word. So we're like, oh, that's not what I meant.
Yes.
And then it's having humility in that, and going, I probably could have picked different words. That wasn't my intention. And so that's the other one, intention versus impact, right? Assuming positive intent, and to be able to articulate, you may not be aware of the impact of when you said that or did this, or you wrote that email and you didn't even say hello. It was just like so demanding. Yes. Well, I maybe ask the person, was that your intention? Now, there are people that like, that's my intention. There are, yes. I was on a podcast almost a year ago called Don't Be a Jerk at Work. Nice. Plug another podcast, but no, they're friends of mine and went to school together. And like, there are people that they're like, no, that was my intention. Well, but honestly, there's probably still something behind that they're stressed about or struggling with or whatever. But, really saying, understanding that everybody generally has good intention. It just may have the wrong impact. And we judge everybody by their impact on us. We judge ourselves by our intentions, right? So yes. That gap between intention and impact is that awareness gap, and just taking a look at it going, maybe I'm stressed because it didn't happen the way I expected it to, or that person did. But just kind of taking that little micro moment just to kind of pause and saying, how can I shift in this moment? Yes. To address it? And I have a real life example. Do I have time to share a real life example of
Absolutely.
This one? Okay.
Yes.
So I was at an airport. I was flying for work because before the pandemic. I remember flying. Oh man. So it was a busy airport. Everybody's like rustling around, and we're lined up to get onto the plane. And this woman comes rushing through. There's tons of people. We're all like, lane 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and she's coming in. Where's 3? And she just parks right in front of me, cuts me right in line. I'm like, the immediate reaction is, what are you doing? Right. And in that moment, I decided, I was like, I don't know what it was. There was something in that moment. I said, are you okay? I said, yeah, busy airport, eh? It's just so, and I just started a conversation versus reacting and saying, yeah, you're this back of the line. Yes. Which probably my brain, I was saying that. Yes. But in that moment, I changed that her intention wasn't, I'm going to assume positive intention. She's just stressed. There was something going on. And so we had this conversation. We actually got to know each other a little bit. She explained what was going on and her, stuff at home, and just wasn't even thinking clearly. She apologized. And then she actually worked in human resources. So I work in HR. And she's like, well, give me your card and maybe we can hire you or something. So it literally went from a moment where I could have reacted to that impact of being cut off, right, in line, to just shifting that little micro moment, right, to say, is everything okay? I know, busy airport, eh? Like just shifting that, the words, the energy, and I got a lead out of it. I mean, so, totally. And she had a better day, right? It shifted her energy as well. And so it's just a real life example that it's those little moments that count. And sometimes we're quick to react when the person cuts us off in traffic or whatever that is. And sometimes just maybe there's something really going on, right? And so off you go, right? Yes. So thank you, right? Yes, I'm going to go back to Tim Hortons and get another coffee, like whatever it is. So it's just finding a different frame of mind in those moments, and intention versus impact is kind of a key one that a lot of people know about, but it's a good refresher. Yes. To remind ourselves of those the words and the mindset around it. So.
Yeah. Man, you're powerful. So as you're sharing these stories, I'm relating it to just past conversations or things I feel I do right or whatever. And in trucking, obviously, accidents can happen. And that's one of the biggest things that I coach carriers on, as well as drivers, is I'm like, we'll get to what happened. Let's focus on, are you okay? Yeah. Because and that could be with a lot of scenarios, but just when you were sharing that story, instead of just responding hostile because someone did something or could have done something that maybe it's not favorable, you're kind of like, whoa, are you okay? And just even though it's in your head, that's what you want to say. being aware enough. Yeah, that was like,
Yeah.
dude, yeah.
I mean, I've had moments where I've reacted for sure. Like, I'm like, oh, I should have gone another way. I've had
Yeah.
that, but the times when you actually do pivot and go with kindness and curiosity, it's amazing what can come out of that.
Yes.
It just creates a little pattern shift, and you're just like,
Yes.
oh, well, that's powerful. You know,
Yes.
yeah. Anyways, I appreciate you get that, and I think
Yeah.
it's good for the listeners to think about those moments and whatever they're going through, or those little moments. It all starts to add up sometimes if we don't start to look at how do we course correct and pivot, and it's okay that, oh man, I didn't handle that right. That's okay. You can't change it. What you can do is you can change this moment and that moment, right? And so,
Yeah.
the present's a gift, and all that stuff. But anyways, like but you can't change the past.
Right.
You can learn from it, the wisdom that you can get from that.
Yeah.
And so those wounds, right, turn them into wisdom as much as you can and as quick as you can. And some things are just going to be painful for a long time. And I was on a workshop the other day, a couple of weeks ago, I guess, and somebody said, oh, Sean's great, but like there's some really complex stuff too. And I said, yeah, I know, like we only have 45 minutes today and can't go through it, but there are some long-term mental health, mental illness situations that require, professional help and from your doctor and mental health practitioner. So again, it's really important that I just wanted to say that because it's stuck
Yes.
with me when, people that I talk to and do training with, and we talk about different topics and pieces, and I'm not a psychologist or a counselor, but I'm an HR professional, lived experience, and I come at this from that lens. But it's important that whatever people are going through and if it's really significant, that you do get, the professional help that you need, and find a doctor, counselor, psychologist. And part of the challenge is access to care, right? And so the cost of these things, and the access and the service. So yeah, there are challenges in trying to access resources. So I think that's really important. I'll send you some resources, Josh, that you can share around or post that I shared that kind of goes beyond kind of employee assistance programs, but just some of the other publicly funded programs that are out there for eating disorders, substance abuse. Obviously the people may know about Kids Help Phone for youth, and jack.org, and there's lots of different resources. But I think that's important that we continue to share those public resources that are available. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And that was a really good overview, Sean, of just what can we as leaders do and understanding our limitations too. And hey, sometimes it's much more than just being empathetic. Sometimes it's someone just needs help, and that's totally fine. But I like the word humility, and I like that term, from wounds to wisdom, because I think you can change the culture. Again, just trying to everything you're saying, I'm processing, so I'm learning at this moment. It's super cool. But you can really change a culture through empathy and humility, and understand, hey, I messed up, man, like, or gal, whoever it's speaking to, how do you shift, you pivot, and then you kind of, no, I think that's awareness is super important. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it's really important that sometimes there's might be a trickle versus a waterfall, right? So it's just understanding that, and sometimes you just don't know, right? So it's just keeping the conversation going and talking about this stuff. I mean, what you're doing is awesome, that you're creating a platform for this conversation that we can share with listeners and hopefully change a life or two, right? I mean, that's kind of the key. And people start, that whole, like, put the pebble in the pond, it creates a ripple, right? And that's the whole intention of, what we're doing, right? So,
yeah, I agree. So I do have a question. It's one of my mentors asked it to me. So it's actually one of my favorite questions now is, what do you believe your superpower is?
I love superpower. Oh man. There's a few things that I would say that I appreciate, skill wise, but I think for me, negotiation. So where this comes in, and so I was a buyer with a retailer. So I left HR for about a year and a half, became a buyer, and managed a category, and learned all about negotiation and how we made money and profit and negotiate with vendors, that kind of stuff. And it was an incredible learning experience, especially going from HR and to a buyer. It was just like, we don't really put HR people into buyer roles, but I knew the leaders and was able to get in there but I mean the first 90 days was difficult. I think I broke down. I was like, too many decisions. How are your numbers? How are your numbers? I was like, and so I learned a lot, but then that became a skill that I really appreciated having, a superpower. Because when I went back into HR and then got into obviously the looking at benefits and wellness and disability, I use that skill, that superpower, to really understand what the other person's looking to achieve, understanding the art of the deal, understanding what their bosses are looking for, understand that it's not just one conversation, but it's the many that follow that we are talking about. So understanding the end game. And when it comes specifically, and as I might have mentioned earlier, is when I work with disability vendors or claims managers, I want to understand the SLAs, the service level agreements, the scripts. What are those case managers saying to my employees? Like I'm like, they're my family, like it's like follow the script, always call the manager if there's this, like make sure you get all the interviews done and be consistent. And because I've seen it where cases weren't actually approved and they should have been, right? And so so the negotiation, I think that's the one I kind of gravitate to, because it really allows me to really look at the opportunity costs. Like, are we spending money we shouldn't be spending that can be reallocated to employee wellness programs and mental health training? So can we move those dollars and get better service and experience for our employees? And it also helps the vendor show up stronger, right? And so they're also an organization with people that are trying to do their best as well. So working with them, not against them. And it's a real, it's a balance, right? But you've got to invest in that. They're an extension of your team, and they're supporting your employees and their families. So don't forget about not just the employees, but the families that may be going through something. So I think that would be my, and I think and to actually see dollars get reinvested, to see better claims experience, shorter, adjudication to claim, and people getting back to work and faster. So it's all in the negotiation skills I learned as a buyer that allowed me to feel confident as a benefits, HR professional, to work with those. And there were some tough ones. Like, oh no, Sean's at us, like, so I mean, maybe I was too strong sometimes.
Yes.
I look back, I was like, okay, but it was in service. My intention was to get the best deal, the best experience. Right. And I might have over, and I have humility in that. Maybe my impact was too strong in moments. But I learned from those things too. But I think that's the one it's kind of unique. Not everybody's been a buyer and a HR guy. So I think that's
totally
kind of unique. Yeah.
It's nice too, because again, you're growing from your story to impact others. And I think that's a really good statement for your life. Just knowing you for a short time is you have I would say that's an additional superpower that you have. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. So as you kind of continue to navigate in this space, kind of as we come to a close, what do you want your legacy to be when it's all said and done?
Well, I think it's continuing on to continue, just keep the conversation going and sharing and, hoping just to keep impacting, one life, one community, one organization, and just keep on. I mean, it's every day is a blessing to get up and kind of do this work. And I think that's huge. I think to be, set a good example for, my family. I've got lots of nieces and nephews. My brother has 9 kids. So he's
incredible.
Yeah. And so, and some of them are older now, they've already got kids. So, I mean, I think, I always think about family, and, and those that are close in my family, my home. Right. So just being as good as it can be. But yeah, that's how I would probably frame it. It's been like the first part of my career was all about, climbing up the corporate ladder and, working crazy hours, and, it was a good ride.
Yes.
But then I hit burnout. I gained, over 40, 50 pounds at one point. It wasn't, I've gone through cycles where and then to a point where I broke out in skin rash because I was super stressed. My doctor was like, you need to take some time out work. Yes. So I've hit those walls, right? And I wasn't self-regulating, right? So I think the legacy now is to set a good example and all these little moments, and just appreciate that. And hopefully that's helping other people, that are coming up into HR, into this space, to maybe take some of my stories and find courage in sharing their stories, to help others. So that creating that, that ripple effect,
Nice.
that feels good, So if, like,
Yeah.
it's an interesting next chapter, like, as it's 40 something now, it's,
Yes.
it's kind of taking stock, and yeah, there's definitely been moments in my own journey where it's just like, okay, I can do better, right? But be kind to myself. I think that's where you
Yes.
kind of get critical. And so I think part of setting good example or legacy or whatever the term is, it's about being kind to ourselves too when we don't maybe show up the way we
Yes.
thought we should have shown up, right? So humility, right?
Yes.
So, and then I think then that creates an example, hopefully, for those around us. So
Yeah. Power, man. Yeah, and you are. I can see it. And again, I know we've only had a handful of conversations, but
yeah,
I can see it. And just
thank you.
as I mentioned, mutual friends with my wife, and I say your name, she smiles. She's like, such a good guy. I'm like, okay, that's so you are living your legacy. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So
Appreciate that.
yeah, absolutely. So people are interested to learn more, obviously, about you as a person, about game plan, total rewards, as well as change one life.
Yeah.
How can people get in contact with you?
Yeah, so I mean, we've got the website gameplantotalrewards.ca, so we can put that on the podcast details. So yeah, go on the website. You can contact me. There's you can just email me directly, and do have an Instagram, Change One Life Instagram as well. So you can follow us there as well. And I post just things that I'm always collecting and learning from other mental health service providers and organizations. So yeah, Instagram, I have a Change One Life handle as well. We can share that. Yeah, and happy to connect. And yeah, it's thank you so much for having me part of this today. So
Yeah, Sean, this, as I was excited at the beginning, I'm probably more excited now because yeah, I can feel my brain's working. I really appreciate you showing up and really providing a lot of value. I know those that are listening, because it is a pretty broad space, I feel that you were able to speak really clearly on areas that's going to impact a large variety of people. So it means a lot. This was awesome. So
good.
yeah,
Good.
thanks,
Glad
Sean.
to hear.
Absolutely. So okay, well, thank you so much, and just yeah, this was powerful. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah.